Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Putting Data at the Heart of Your Marketing Activation and Understanding Changing Consumer Landscapes. We're really excited to have you with us today. My name is Laura. I'll be chairing this session and this discussion as we dive deep into one of the most critical elements of modern marketing, how data drives marketing strategies in today's rapidly evolving consumer landscape. I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Avneet today and Nick. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, actually. I think they'll do a finer job of that than.
So my name is Avneet Kalsi. I am the Senior Brand Manager at Ellers Distillery. It's a startup company, Distillery, yes, alcohol. So we are co-owned by Ricky Gervais, and we have our leading brand, which is Dutch Barn Vodka. So we do gins, liqueurs, everything. Started in 2022, and Ricky came on board in November. I joined in May. Not that you're probably more interested with Ricky being on, but hey, I'm part of the team too. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick. I head up international growth at Pluto TV, which is a Paramount Pictures company, which is involved in television streaming. Prior to that, I've helped scale global technology brands in the TMT space. Pleasure to meet you all.
Really interesting topics to talk about today. So just to give you a quick idea of the topics we'll approach, we'll talk about the shift to life-centric consumer segmentation, responding to external economic and cultural factors, actioning data using new technologies, and measuring the impact and future trends. So the first question I really want to ask you today is, over the past few years, obviously, consumer behaviors have evolved dramatically, especially in how individuals engage with brands. To kick off, what have you seen consumer behaviors, how have you seen consumer behavior change in your respective industries, and how has that shift impacted your approach to data-driven marketing? Take a seat.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in the television space, we've obviously seen the arrival of television streaming, which has helped promote a lot more variety, a lot more content out there. Consumers now have a huge range of choice. So not only traditional linear live TV, but also on-demand, catch-up television. So the opportunity to view content, to become part of an audience, it's exponentially more. So that increase of choice means, as a vendor, the challenge of tracking down the right audience, providing the right content with for the right particular moment, the challenge has only increased. So that's one huge shift that's happened. So that fragmentation, the increase of choice, as well as the variety of technology platforms upon which and from which you can view content. So not only are you dealing with a typical old school television set-top, you've now got connected TV, iPads, phones, a range of devices. So, the ways in which the industry has evolved and changed, it's immeasurable, and it's only looking to change more and more as we go forward.
Avneet, I'd love to maybe know more about, as well as your current experience, your previous experiences at Mueller's as well.
Yeah, so I previously worked at Fridge Raiders, and when you said about CTV, that was something that we wanted to kind of dabble with, because you're able to niche down and really target who exactly is going to be purchasing us, what is our demographic, and equally what TV shows are appropriate for us. So really leveraging how niche you can go with some of those data points and just generalizing it to everyone on TV is really, really helpful. Particularly when I was at Mueller, actually, when we did our rebrand, we were trying to think again, how can we really dig deeper to see what is it that consumers perceive us as versus how we want to be perceived, using all the different platforms and research touch points, I guess you could call it, to try and see how we perceived what can we be doing differently. So yeah, opportunities to probably see how we can touch point and also communicate us differently, kind of doing A/B testing on different platforms like YouTube and Instagram as well, leveraging everything and combining that into big rebrands like what we did when I was at Mueller.
And I think what I'd add to that is social media has fundamentally changed how we go to market with content.
Yeah.
So, 15 years ago, things like trend hopping, finding the latest meme, working with that, and as a brand doing, social listening. All of that's evolved the last sort of 10 to 15 years, but now it's reached a point where if you're in the content business or you're using content to help drive product sales, you've really got to be on the mark, and a trend might only last 24 hours, 72 hours, if depending on the type of news or trend that's emerging. If you're lucky, the trend might last a week, and you can produce content that fits with, or you can hashtag and say, hey, we're part of that wave, and amplify your content, to a great degree. That didn't really exist to the extent it does a few years ago. So it's been around a number of years, but it's really reached a level that you have to really be attentive to what's the conversations that are in the market, and to how to maximize the opportunity there.
And so, how do you think your industry has adjusted from traditional demographics to more life-centric customer segments?
I will hand that to you.
You're going to hand that to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think more and more we've had to pay a lot of attention to, genres that are of interest to particular audiences, at least in the content business, and really understand what's going to resonate with, like you say, those particular segments. So it might be reality TV for one, it might be sports for another category. But how do you really get quite granular? So it might not be your headline activities, but more niche within those categories and those genres. And as one drills down, it's those pockets of audiences that one has to target and aggregate. So I think, whereas a number of years ago you could have said, well, right, we're gonna target, football league, for example. Whereas now you might be having content from one particular team, and so the audience might be smaller, but the ability to track a loyal follower base or audience is also there. So there's that balance between scale and loyalty that you're trying to track in terms of audiences, and I think the power to unlock that has never been as great as it is now. So, and data is the thing obviously driving that ability to create niche loyal audiences.
If I can go on a slight tangent, actually, just off the point you made, I think particularly with some of the businesses I've worked at, and also just speaking quite candidly with some of my peers, a lot of people are very scared to niche down when it comes to data. I think so many people are like, well, we need 10,000 people to research. Actually, if you find 100 people who really truly understand your brand, or also hit the demographic that you're looking for, that 100 people will be so much more influential than just going for everyone and anyone. So I think, on a complete tangent, don't be afraid to niche down. Sometimes that is a lot more valuable than just going big and hard.
And on a more personal scale, how has that affected your approach to marketing, the way you approach those campaigns?
So I think the range of channels, the range of media touch points, that's grown. So obviously that's part of the fragmentation of media. Things have become a lot more complex. So again, a decade ago, not many advertisers were interested in connected TV. Now the opportunity to advertise on CTV is a huge one. So you've got, not only have you got, web-based, mobile, but now you've got CTV in the mix. And when you look at the infrastructure powering these behind the scenes, CTV is not a web-based ecosystem, so it's not going to work on the same fundamentals for targeting. Your data sets are disparate. So the way in which you go about your job has, the complexification has increased. So I think in that way, it's really a question of saying, well, where do we want to reach these right audiences? What is the opportunity? And really understanding that set and that range of opportunities is much bigger than ever before.
So obviously we're talking about all of the opportunities that brings. I'd like to talk a bit more about the challenges as well now. So navigating external forces when it comes to data in marketing. So economic, social, and cultural factors are constantly influencing consumer behaviors. How does your industry use data to stay flexible and respond to these changes quick?
Well, I think for us being a startup, we're continuously trying to understand what how we can make our brand stand out. So for a bit of context, Dutch Barn vodka, unlike your typical vodkas, are all made out of potatoes or distilled, like Smirnoff, distilled only 3 times. Dutch Barn is made from apples, and we're distilled 70 times. And so for us, we're continuously trying to understand how can we differentiate and change the perception that consumers have of alcohol, particularly when it comes to vodka. Raise of hands, how many people have vodka with mixers? Yeah. How many people have vodka on its own? Oh, okay, a couple, good. I'll talk to you after. But basically, for us, it's how can we change that perception? And so for us, we're continuously trying to look at the data, trying to understand why do people perceive alcohol in a certain way, and equally, what can we do to help strengthen our campaigns and really communicate our brand values to our consumers. Obviously, we're a startup, so we're still trying to understand how we can do that, but it's continuously trying to see what are current perceptions, how can we understand them a lot more by doing those niche targeting and researching and questioning, and then trying to push that out wider and kind of do those A and B testing, saying, okay, well, this comms messaging works for that group of people, let's now trial it on a wider demographic.
Yeah, I think I'll underscore the remarks I made earlier, which are, if we look back at the history of internet marketing, so the last 20, 30 years, since it's been around, starting with web-based marketing, that was cookie-based until recently, and largely still is. But then we had mobile, then we had social media, and social media brought about this idea of a walled garden much more than anything else. Then you've got, as I mentioned, you've got potentially you've got streaming audio, so radio. You've got streaming TV, which is run off a connected TV, CTV platform. So effectively, the challenge we have is there's a lot of different and disparate data sets, and it's how do you bring these things together to make sense of it? And I don't think any of those walls or the platform issues are going away anytime soon. No one's around, if you like, as a vendor to easily solve that, because it's not in the big corporations' interest to open up walled gardens. So I think the biggest challenge for marketers is still very much there's a lot of data points and bringing them together and having an actionable insight about your customer is still a challenge, and I don't think we've gotten to that point of the single view of the customer. I think we were in that space maybe a decade ago where we thought that was solvable, but there's always going to be a new platform, a new outlet that brings about a new operating system, a new way of working that's going to sort of fracture that kind of single perspective. So I think for me the challenge is very much how do you use those data points to create a journey perhaps, but it's not a journey where the underlying data is all aggregated and it's seamless and it's a 360 view, but it's more working with disparate points to create actions. And I think it's a challenge still.
Yeah, obviously it can be really overwhelming on all those different data sources. So in an era of instant gratification, as we've talked about, how do you ensure that the brands meet rising consumer expectations while having a quick turnaround?
I think picking the right channels for that instant gratification is quite helpful. So as I mentioned earlier, a key tactic these days is always trend hopping on social media. So if you're looking at that instant gratification, is your brand relevant? Social media performs in that space very well, whereas other media and other touch points might be less well suited for that. So for example, if your business is in the editorial space, that's a much longer run. That's less about instant gratification, perhaps. So it's really, again, picking the right tool for the right moment. And I think, providing instant gratification isn't always the best remedy. So as long as you tie your brand's products, services, and branding objectives with a keen sense of its values and purpose, you'll have a better steer for which tactic to use and whether or not you want to engage in a instant moment or perhaps a more lead generation type conversation or a sales nurturing process. So it really depends on the type of activity you want to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also really like how you said A microphone issue. Ooh. Sorry.
Has all of us.
True, true. Thank you. So I like how you talk about the right tool for the right moment. I'd love to know more about how you pick the right tool for the right moment. What's your process? Maybe Avneet, do you want to jump on that?
Probably a controversial answer, but having Ricky Gervais as part of our team, we exploit that a lot, particularly on Instagram and Twitter, because we can instantly understand, particularly when we were looking at our branding, actually. We did a live, and we're like, right, you people tell us now, what do you think, what should we do? And that allowed us to get all of our data much quicker. But then, of course, on the flip side, we did get some questionable responses, as you probably would for social media. But I think for us, it's having that touch point, knowing that Ricky in particular, as co-owner for the business, we can touch so many people. And he's got, I don't know how many million of followers, particularly on Twitter. So again, it's having that opportunity to just speak to them very freely and informally. So we, as a startup, really leverage that versus how I've done previously, where you're in that very formal consumer research environment, even looking at data on online surveys and everything. Their answers are very, very different to how candid you can be on social media.
Hello. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid the testing 1, 2, 3 with the mics. I can only underscore that. I think technology has already started to help us do the lifting on things like community management, responding to online conversations. I think it's in its nascent stage at the moment. I wouldn't say I'm overly impressed with where we are, but having recently delved a lot more into AI, for example, I think that a lot of that will be done in a much more effective way in the not too distant future. I think you're right. I think community management, that side of things, is a really interesting area, and I think it's only going to become more important. It's already very important, but the overheads, and most of the brands I've worked with over the years have never really quite cracked that. They've never quite managed to address every concern in a community effectively. There's always been some challenges, and I think going forward, that's going to be a much more improved process for businesses as the technology enables us to work with that in a much more effective way.
So collecting the data, finding the right technology, it's only really the first step. So as a marketer, how do you turn those insights into real marketing actions? And actually, I'm going to go a step further with that question. I want to know what your first steps are once you collect that data.
I think when it comes to an idea like actionable insights from data, that's an idea that's been around a long time. 20 plus years, with the advent of internet marketing in particular, but long before that also. I think, you can collect data, and there can be the easy first ports of call in terms of how one wants to action that. But I always try to look for something a little bit counterintuitive. I'll try to get a bit more niche with audiences, perhaps do breakouts in terms of subgroups. So I think I don't shy away from looking at things in an overly complex way. Splintering off audiences, creating little buckets, and then being mindful that there might be an overarching brand objective still. So it's really, from a data perspective, I always find the two axes I always look at are, obviously on the one hand, going very personal with a personalization objective, one-to-one communication, and then sticking with this whole brand idea. And there's a time and a place for each, and then there's a time and a place to try to sort of balance that through conversations and engagement. So anything that I'm pulling in through a data perspective, I'm being mindful of those two ends of the axes and knowing that you can't do both effectively, and sometimes there are trade-offs. I think that's, those are some of the best things I do personally to try to manage that.
One example I would give, when I was at Muller, we'd had the same packaging for way too many years. And so we wanted to do some research to see, okay, again, how can we change this? What can we do differently? We know we need to do something, but we don't know what that means. And so for us, it was doing that consumer research, consumer listening, but we took it to a next level where we were in the shops listening. It's a bit scary how much you can stalk consumers, but we were in Tesco's listening to exactly what they're talking about. We were on the shelves. We had literally mics in the things, understanding what are people saying about our brands, what are they talking about our products, what do they say about our flavors, what are they saying online on Twitter, what are they saying about with other competitor brands like Alpro, which was on the rise with all the plant-based products as well. So when we started to look down into some of the particular words, if you think about like a word cloud, traditional, old, boring were the three words that kept coming up for Muller. I'm seeing a few heads, like nodding heads. Great, thanks. I don't work there anymore, but it's fine. But it was true. We were very old, very boring. And so when we knew all of this information is telling us the same thing, when you talk about reactive marketing, that was, how can we do that differently? Let's just visually do something as a quick fix to then understand what campaigns do we need to do, what values, communication do we need to change, because we can't keep doing the same thing again and again. So I think not waiting until the next rebrand or until the next product launches, it's what can we do then and there. And actually, because I laugh because I shouldn't be telling you this, but I laugh because that feedback was so candid and honestly the wake-up call that the brand needed. We were winning all these awards of new product awards of the year and all these other things, but at the end of the day, our consumers still thought we were old and boring, so we had to do something very dramatic, and that rebrand in itself, typically, for FMCG is about 13 months, we did that in 6 months, because we were like, right, we need to do something now. We're not gonna wait until the next year or the next window of opportunity within the retailer dates. So I think, again, it's, yes, be reactive to the data, but challenge you, how quickly can you do it? Because you don't want to lose to our competitors like Alpro and everyone else. You don't want to have that funnel drop even more than it did at that time.
And were you met with any challenges when it comes to actioning that data, specifically with that rebranding story? Do you think having that candid feedback, that data really helped you show to the rest of your team that you actually needed to act on it? But did you face any challenges?
Our challenges were more from, I mean, kind of stepping away from the data side, but it was more from a brand perspective, because Muller is such an iconic brand and there's so much heritage to that. It's how do we step away to be a bit more relevant to, at that time, 2022, how can we do things that are relevant to now versus what we've been doing for the past 100 years? And that was stepping into plant-based. That was launching a whole new portfolio, saying that we're still listening. Yes, we're still primarily a dairy company, but we hear you. We will do plant-based versions. So it's actually not only doing the rebrand, but also offering new products to prevent us from losing more people with the rise of veganism and plant-based dietary requirements, I suppose. It's jumping at that and saying, okay, I hear you, what can we do? And also just give us a chance to launch the products too before you switch to everyone else.
I think that's a really interesting example, because you know, it's a classic Ford example, which is if you ask people back in the day what they would want, they would say they want a faster horse, not a car. So I think with the dairy products and veganism, you know, you would say it's a category that doesn't have that much disruption, but actually it does from an external perspective. And so I think coming back to the data, and you know, if you're listening to the data, there's still an element that sometimes you might not have the right questions, you know, coming through on the data. You might be, you know, people might be asking for different flavors in the previous example, rather than a whole new innovative product. And so there's this balance between, you know, maybe what the dominant data is saying versus what the emergent data is saying. And so, you know, data analysis is quite a tricky thing, because you're really looking for what's emerging as a trend also, rather than just focusing on the dominant. If you focus just on the dominant, I think eventually most businesses will be out of business, you know, if you wait long enough. So, you know, there's also this element that the brand needs to pay attention to what's going on in the market, but then operate with the really great brands, operate with leadership. And it could be product leadership in terms of product development, offering the market what it doesn't know it needs yet. And that's, you know, so it needs to get that balance between its core offering and perhaps disruption. So, and how does how does that conversation in terms of product and business service, how does that mirror in terms of data and what one's looking at? Well, that's quite interesting because of the dominant versus emergent question.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really interesting point about brands needing to really pay more attention to emergent data, because when I think data, originally I think numbers, I think hardcore, like mathematics almost, whereas nowadays data is so much more than that. It could be a candid feedback that helps you do a whole rebrand. So how do you, like as a specialist in your field, how do you really take that data, show it to people and highlight the value of it, even if it comes from a candid comment?
I think you often have to look at the multi-dimensional nature of this thing called data, right? So it could be your business. You could look at it through a kaleidoscope of metrics. You could have charts that show one dimension, charts that show another dimension. And it's often very difficult to put them all onto one slide that'll make a clear point. You've often got to be, it comes back to that key point that really good data people are able to put them together and draw out that narrative. And what I'd say that narrative is one of what, perhaps what's the emergent trend or where's the core value. And it's that ability to see past the BAU aspect. And I think we often get stuck on the BAU. And for me, BAU would often be tied up with things like traditional KPIs, etc. And when we're looking at averages, they could be percentages. Averages often obscure all that interesting stuff. So you've got to dig a little bit deeper, look into the raw data, and see what's popping. So roll back 20 years ago, you would look at search data and you'd see there's certain keyword intent. It might be niche. Nowadays, it might be trend hopping with a hashtag on social media, or more pertinently, what's happening with particular niche audiences, on CTV or something like that. So you've really got to be attuned to where's the dynamic force within the data, and that's something you just have to have a trained eye for. I think going forward, obviously you would have presumably much better platforms to watch what's shifting the dial. So what micro data sets are trending with a greater velocity. Where they're moving in a certain, little subsets are moving in a certain direction. The growth of those sets is peaking, and then you can that it's going to signal a trend. So really just understanding how to look at data, how to form subsets. It's set logic all over again. Yeah.
So you're almost talking about like training your data muscle, almost. It's like a habit that you form. So how would you grow that data muscle?
I think one of the things I did 20 years ago when I built old school search teams, for example, was you hire maths people. You hire people with an eye or an aptitude for numbers. But not only that, they have a passion for solving problems, looking at numbers in a certain way. Statisticians are fantastic at this. I mean, AI is really just stats repackaged. So if you really understand the fundamentals of maths and statistics, you kind of know who to hire, and people with a passion for their product. So if you overlay that with whatever your service offering is, you'll find someone that's really going to excel in that kind of role.
What about you, Avneet? How did you train your data muscle?
I'm laughing for different reasons, because I will tell you, I hate data. I can't think of anything worse. I will procrastinate like crazy because, again, sometimes it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole of there is so much numbers, there is so much information, what do I do with all of it? So I think, yes, having all that information is so important, but also very scary at the same time, and I don't want to do it. I've trained my brain now, when you talk about muscle memory and I guess the data memory or data muscle, however you said, it's trying to just think about what the 3 things that I can take about our performance in the past week. If it's sales, or if it's our retailer distribution, or if it's just the number of followers that we have on social media. And then from there, I'll start to build the story and kind of go down and create that wider level and going down into the intricacies of all of it. So for me, when I see data, I'm always thinking, A, how are our sales doing? What is our revenue? And also, because we're a startup, it's important to think about the social following and the cult representation that we've got as well. So thinking top level, and then I'll filter down. But I think also, like you said, you have to have an eye for it. And I think not being scared to change the way they think about data, in that actually it is the most important thing. Personally, I don't think sales, I mean, challenge me, but I don't think sales and marketing can exist without data. And equally, you need data to be at the front of everything that you do, because yes, I like that. I was a very confident nod. Because you can keep going, like for example at Dutch Barn, we prioritize sales, and we said, right, we need to get into all of the retailers, we need to have our like 100% retailer distribution, blah, blah, blah. We did all of that, but no one knows what Dutch Barn is. So we'd got it wrong. We actually need to think a step back, is people are following us, how many people are aware of us, let's build that brand awareness, use the data to understand how many people know about us, and communicate that and relay that into our retailers. We prioritize sales because the sales data is most important. Flip it around and treat it together with marketing. It goes hand in hand.
And I'll add to that. I think, if the data's not saying anything interesting, look at it through a set of different lenses. So, anything, geo, intent, social, whatever it might be. Look at the various data sets that you're looking at, and then say, hey, am I asking the right questions of the data? And or in my view, always steer away from the obvious. So, if it's not saying anything interesting, perhaps the questions aren't the questions interrogating the data aren't the right ones. So change the question.
Yeah, definitely, because it's so easy to also say, oh, everything's fine. Well, no, challenge it. And now, because I've gone from hating data to being obsessed, and I will continue to say, no, what is the one anomaly in all of this? What is the one problem? Even if there isn't, find one, because that's how you can transform the business and make it plummet way more. That one conversation that we had of just trying to find that anomaly got us listed into Costco, and it was a 5-minute conversation. And that would not have happened if I didn't say, actually, yes, this is an amazing story, but I'm going to challenge them and say, let's find the problem, and what can we do with that? And that equaled getting us into Costco, repositioning our pricing in Costco specifically versus Tesco's and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more about that, actually. How do you challenge your data? What questions do you ask your data?
My question is always, so what? Typically, it is literally, what does this data mean? And just going, so what, until you get into that rabbit hole. So for example, if I can see that our sales performance is really high in Tesco, so what? Okay, because we're on Club Card. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, actually, this is the demographic of people who are purchasing. So what? Well, 50% of them are all 70 plus. Okay, so what? So that means those aged 70 plus are somehow more interested than those aged 70 or less. So what? How can we target those people who are not purchasing from us? And just continuing from there.
Yeah, I think that's really good. That's so what, so what does it mean and what's the implication? In the content business, it's often, what's the affinity? So, people are watching a certain type of content. What are they watching next? And one can get incredibly granular around the various pathways from a particular point of content, and really understand that people are watching a certain show. X percentage go on to watch another show, X percentage go on to watch another show, and vice versa. What percentage of people in those shows are watching the other shows? So you get what we call content affinities, and that kind of addresses that so what aspect. So you say to yourself, well, so what does that mean then? So can we start to bucket things? How does that then bubble up into how we're doing our content strategy? What sort of messages do we need to have? What sort of content? What sort of genres are working together? And how do things intersect? So I think a lot of that is around the not just stopping at the first point of call, but going, so what? That's super helpful.
I really love that, and I want to take a step back almost now and ask you sort of like the boring, nitty-gritty questions. What tools? What technology? I want names. I need to know.
I'm going to hand that all to you.
I'm not going to get very granular with tech platforms and names, but I do. I'll make a very quick remark about the issue I raised earlier, which is, still today I don't see fully fledged solutions for, connected TV, mobile web, and these are down to fundamental issues around data, around walled gardens, around the big players in the market, and so I think there are vendors out there that help with data, that help with point solutions, that are immeasurably valuable. But I think making an exhaustive list. I think it's everyone in this room. It's a multitude of vendors that help contribute, and your particular MarTech stack, your solution, will really depend on your business challenge in particular. So. I think it was remarked a few years ago. No two MarTech stacks are exactly the same. No two businesses are exactly the same, and everything is emerged with either a history that one deals with in terms of how someone's architected their solution of technology touch points, or where they're heading with bigger partnerships, and that's going to affect how one pieces together solutions. So. I think there's a lot of point solutions involved in making sense of data, in interpreting data, analyzing data, and it's really business dependent.
I'd like to talk a bit more as we're shifting towards the end of this conversation about the future of data, really. So, looking ahead, do you foresee any trends shaping data-driven marketing?
I'm going to go with the very obvious one, which is the other studio down the road there, which is around AI. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I recently did a course in AI, and my mind was blown. Building a recommendation with Microsoft Studio in Azure in under 5 minutes. You couldn't do that previously. You couldn't access databases that were public or licensed. And operate on data sets in the way that you can today. You couldn't do that 5 years ago. Not with the ease of access. It was, maybe if you're in the know, you could have done it in certain ways. But that ease of access, I've never seen anything like that. I think the thing that's going to shape us going forward is bigger than, if I roll back to the early noughties, those that were most versed and power users of Microsoft Office, so it could have been Excel, it could have been PowerPoint. Those guys did really well in the office then. Now it's going to be the people that understand how to get the most out of AI, who's going to be an end user of ChatGPT, who's going to extract value out of Azure or some kind of statistical operator, in terms of extracting information from the right data sets. The people that are end users of that are definitely going to benefit. They're going to move faster. We're going to enter into a multi-speed office environment driven by those that are able to operate those kind of tools. And that's just going to be part-time interests and hobbies of those kind of employees versus those that are kind of just averse to it. And I personally, it still amazes me at the speed at which things are moving. So there's not a day that goes by that I don't say, wow, that wasn't possible until very recently. So I think keeping up with things and the speed, and it's AI, it is happening, and it's changing in a way that is far more accessible than ever before.
I can't remember the name, but hopefully you'll understand what I'm talking about. But things like Alexa and the voice recognition stuff, I think that is also going to take off, because particularly with Dazon, as we're looking to go into new countries and obviously the translation and everything, that for me I think is going to be really interesting when it comes to just putting things straight into the basket and seeing it next day delivery. So I think understanding how that could advance over the next years for me is particularly interesting to see. I mean, it's already advanced now, where is it going to be in 5-10 years?
Yeah.
And how do you get ready for these changes?
Keep your eyes open. I think increasingly it is difficult. I used to, 20 years ago, I used to have 1 or 2 trade press sites which were sources of keeping up to date with developments. Who's a new vendor, what are they providing, what's the value. Keeping up with thought leadership was relatively easy. Now it is difficult. So keeping up with things just requires one to be incredibly vigilant of what's going on in the market.
Yeah. And I think being open and adaptable as well. I think, conscious of my wording now, I'll put it out there. I'm Gen Z. So for me, when it comes to AI, I'm often the go-to in the office. But there is also now an alpha or whatever the next, alpha, they're now in the office as well. So I think play to your team. So if you know that someone has more of an interest, for example, in AI, or they understand these news data, ChatGPT things that are coming out, use that and leverage that in your team. Because I know sometimes it's very easy to think, oh no, we can do things without AI. Play to it, be adaptable, and if not, build yourself a team where they can specialize in it and you can use them. Don't feel like you have to keep continuing the way that things are going.
Yeah,
it's
agreed.
scary, but sometimes, I know I'm Gen Z, but sometimes the people who are younger than me, they know what they're doing, and I'm like, yeah, you do that.
So I'm going to ask you guys one last question before we move on to the Q&A. I want to know, what do you want people here today to take away from this discussion? What's the one takeaway?
I think it's the point I made earlier, which is, look at data sets often in a counterintuitive way. Look for something that's going to be surprising, something that's going to be insightful, and often it's about emerging trends in the data. So rather than what's dominant. So don't always go for the average or whatever the data's saying overall, but rather look for the emerging trends. I'd say that's a key takeaway.
And probably just echoing the point I made earlier is that you need to put data first. Don't be me and run away from it. Embrace it. And I think also find colleagues who can support you to transition from hating data to becoming obsessed with it. Data is at the heart of everything that we do, and I think you need to prioritize it more. I went from running to now spending time every Friday afternoon, because I'm a loser, looking at data, thinking what is the one thing that I can pull out from this week, and what is the one thing that I can make sure we do not do next week, and kind of cutting that circle then and there, then just continuing and doing that analysis on a 3-month, 6-month basis.
Amazing. So if we could get a mic over there to do a quick Q&A, that'd be amazing. So if anyone has a question here today, could you please raise your hand? Amazing, the lady in the front.
Hello, can you hear me? Thanks a lot for the great panel. I have a question to Heineken. Yeah. Beer is quite specific. I don't know whether many people know, but there is generally the consumer is not that important from the perspective of data. Yeah, you have mentioned that you are using data to understand better, the product feedback and the brand positioning to create a better storytelling around data. Yeah, but at the same time, when you look at data, it's the sales data that is more important. So the question, and I know that trade and generally sales is more important for consumer packaged good companies. The question is, have you tried any direct-to-consumer activities? And if yes or no, what data, the aspect of importance of data would be critical to start those D2C activities? So direct-to-consumer, yeah.
Yeah. For us, we've done, like I said, we're a startup. So for us, it's trying to understand how can we communicate, because it's very difficult without sampling the product to convince people to buy something, particularly when it comes to alcohol and particularly when it comes to the vodka in itself. So for us, we're doing a number of bar activations, going into literally just having pop-up stores or bars where we can then ask consumers then and there to sample it neat, but then also as a mixer as well. So trying to understand what is it that their perception is, and then how can we either adjust our recipe if we need to, dependent on, for example, as we're launching internationally, the flavor profile or taste profile is very different in Germany than it is to the UK, and equally in Canada, to the UK. So trying to understand how can we adjust and adapt our products based on their taste profile, but then also asking them straight up, what do you think about this branding? What do you think about this? And again, kind of doing it in a more informal manner than what you would do necessarily in a consumer research room.
If I can add to the answer a little bit, No, I think sales data is very much like accountancy data, which is real time, but often looking at historical. That's your business today. It's a snapshot of today and the past. Strategy and marketing data might, if used in the right way, marketing data can look a glimpse at the future. And it's again that point that I made earlier, which is what are the emerging trends? So definitely a distinction, and for sure, sales data often rules the roost in terms of a business operation, but marketing data, if you're looking at it and asking the right questions of it, can give you an indication of where to head. So more about the emergent and future-facing. So think if it's done more strategically.
Amazing. Does anyone else have a question for us today? No? All good. Well, again, thank you very much. I think we can give a round of applause to our amazing speakers.
Thank you.